Okay, so while my petals are drying here, and these are actually mostly dry, I don't want them to bleed, I'm going to paint my background, and that's this area here, and I'm going to go right over the leaves. And this is a good, initially we painted a flat wash, just a solid color across our whole paper, and this time we're going to paint similar. We're going to be wet and wet. I'm using lots of paint in different colors, but I'm going to be adding in different colors as I go across the page. One thing you don't want to do is when you're filling in an area like this, you don't want to outline it first with your brush. A lot of artists, beginning painters, are going to want to paint a line around the petals like this. And what happens is when that dries, because it will dry as you're filling in the area, there's going to be a line, a crisp line there all along, and when you come in later and go in and fill that in, you're going to see that line and it's going to look like it was outlined. So in this case I'm just going to bleed it out, and that area can wait till I come across with my green. So I'm using sap green primarily to start with as my base color. Just using the tip of my brush to fill it in. Notice I'm always pulling with my brush. I never push. I have a lot more control when I'm pulling my brush and sliding it sideways along the edge. There we go. And I'm also going to, that flat green's a little bit boring, so I'm going to grab some of the yellow that I used in my petals and drop some of that in. I'm also going to grab some cobalt blue and put some of that in, and because the area is wet, it's going to bleed and be pretty.
So I'm just going to quickly continue, of course this is speeded up a little bit, painting in my green. As it's wet, I'm dropping in more colors, more of the blue, more of the raw sienna, some different shades of green, and just letting it blend together. As long as it's wet, I can keep dropping in colors and blending, as long as it's got that shiny wet look. A little bit of shadow color where the petals are going to be casting a shadow on the background, and we'll go in and refine some of that color later. Now we give it a chance to dry. Just drop in a few more warm colors and
we'll move right on. Because my petals are dry, they serve as a barrier between my background and my center, so I'm going to paint the center of my flower.
Okay, so we're just going to paint the center while we're waiting for the background to dry. I'm going to show you some of the ones I've painted in the past. As you can see, there's a bright kind of smile area on the sunflower center, and then the darker area. There's lots of texture in each one. Here's another one that's mostly just the wet and wet stage. These are unfinished demonstrations from previous classes. And I think probably my favorite is this one. And it's got this lovely yellow, and then the wet and wet just I don't know, has a lot of texture and just a really nice tone to it. I really should finish that one. It's one of my favorites. So we're going to just get started by mixing up some colors that we're going to be using. And we're going to start with that yellow smile and just pure New Gamboge straight across, and drop in a little bit more color, some cadmium red. We want this to be nice and vibrant. This is going to be peeking through our darker layers as we paint that in. And just because the seeds themselves in the center are kind of spiky, I try to use short, zigzaggy, spiky strokes as I'm painting. I always try to mimic the shape of whatever I'm painting with the shape of my brush strokes. I like that little line up there. Might just have to leave it, see what we get as we paint. Now I'm taking Winsor Violet just straight from the palette, and I'm going to drop that in, let it mix with the wet New Gamboge and cadmium red in some places, stand on its own kind of in the center. So a nice mix of darks and lots of interesting brush strokes. Where the seeds meet the petals, there is a lot of dark. I'm dropping in some burnt umber now, just a nice brown, and some more cadmium red for some warmth. As these colors mix, you get new color mixtures, and it's just fascinating to see what colors do when they interact with each other, wet and wet.
Just going to see what adding extra water does. And the nice thing about doing that is if you're not liking where things are going, this is the time to take your paper towel and just blot a little bit. And it's just going to lighten up that area. And then you can go back once it's dry and add more color and depth. I'm going to add some cobalt blue as well. Cobalt blue is the complement to orange, so it's really not out of place in this painting, which has a lot of orange. I'm just going to let it kind of blurb in there. Again, it will turn green when mixed with yellow though, so it's something you want to be aware of and a little bit wary of. So you can see it blending right in there, and I'm going to watch that spot so it doesn't do an ugly thing. In fact, I'm going to add a little more yellow in here. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. I think I'm pretty happy with it. There's a couple of areas I just didn't paint at all right here and in there, and that's just going to add some interest and texture. And I'm also going to go in later and add some more darks, add some texture, and so that's exactly where I want it to be for the first layer of actual painting.